connection that we see. But the connection on data remains important. The connection on language should never be ignored. That in-depth information, understanding vulnerabilities of those populations that are in need. And there you really do see diaspora taking that space. And then the last one is on the engagement. And the engagement there is usually with a bit of a long-termism. It's not just coming in to provide the needs like you would see with a lot of sort of, emergency needs that are coming in, but really thinking about the long term. What will really happen as people have been displaced, as people are being moved? What is the next step? I think it's usually very easy for, organizations that could just come in, provide some basic needs, but what about that in-depth information and staying in for the long haul? So support not just for today, but for what happens next. So staying that long course has been very important for a lot of diaspora across the world, whether we're looking at crisis that has happened in the recent months or crisis that has been taking place in many parts of the world. And because of these connections, diaspora is able to stand in for that long term. A lot of us have heard about, for instance, discrimination cases in the movement of third country nationals that have been fleeing Ukraine. It was big stories, and now we hardly hear about it. Diaspora remain on it. Diaspora remain understanding it. What's that experience? But that also means diaspora then begin to relate to some of the issues they have been facing themselves and are able not just to carry burden with others, but join with others in advocacy. And there are many other examples that we can give there in terms of dealing with various vulnerabilities. But I think it's also been very important to realize that diaspora couldn't remain that connected without the use of technology. I'm sure if I ask many of you to check your WhatsApp, it would be very interesting to hear how many groups you have signed up to. And from school groups in your high schools, and for those who are diaspora, working groups and places where people have engaged with. And those remain relatively important in picking information. So sometimes these are not sitting in ministries of education or with donor agencies. A lot of information really kept in those networks. Networks remain very important for diaspora. The link to the homeland beyond the crisis helps them make that connection to make the different connection, also moving from this humanitarian place to this development space, which I hope we'll be talking about later on. But then, it all sounds as though diaspora is having a blast in this, or seems to have all that they need in order to support and navigate. But a lot is missing. And as Christian had just alluded to, recognition, visibility, numbers, the space to engage. Sometimes diaspora have been separated from their homelands because of political related issues, and so engaging in humanitarian spaces, that remains as a barrier and a blockage. Can we really look away from some of these issues? So I'm hoping that we'll be able to unpack some of these things. What about trust? When we were just watching the video, we heard how trust is important. Trust with whom? With the homelands, with the organizations. How are we going in really for the long-termism? How do we deal with second generation and further generations and how they engage? How do we deal with their questions around sustainability? Can we be more intentional in listening to the voices in the diversity of the diaspora? Can we also bring these back to the center of conversations when we talk about support to humanitarian spaces, instead of us assuming that it will be easy to participate and contribute? How about building bridges and knowledge? How do we bring in evidence from the local to feed the global focus, to feed the national focus, to feed the regional responses that we see in relation to crisis? How do we build bridges also with that subnational and the grassroots level? How do we build bridges for communication and information? And indeed, I think as I end, I think it's important that we understand that in every space that we take, whether we're looking at diaspora engaging in a space, we don't leave anyone from the diaspora space behind because of any kind of considerations, but also that as diaspora engage, they're sure not to leave anyone behind. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Paddy, for that, really setting that scene. And what really resonates with me when you were talking about labels, right, and local language and how they refer to diaspora. So I just want to share with you, in India, I'm called an NRI, non-resident Indian, and it has a connotation, positive and negative. Or I'm called OCI, Overseas Citizen of India. Again, it has a connotation, negative or positive. So we really have to be aware of that identity and what it brings, and that thing about connection, right? Really, really important about diversity and connection, because there's so many of us, so different, right? And how do we bring that value? And of course, the challenges that you also identified, very, very important. And I think these are some of the things we should be really discussing here and taking things forward. So what I wanted to do now is introduce Daniella Villacres, and she can't be with us here in person, but she is Diaspora and Public Sector Engagement Team Lead in the Office of Global Policy, Partnership, Programs and Communication at USAID's Bureau for Humanitarian Assistance. So she specializes in diaspora engagement, remittances, and civil engagement. So at the USAID Bureau for Humanitarian Assistance, Daniella leads a team focused on expanding opportunities to engage diaspora community and for humanitarian assistance. And also the team focuses on ensuring that they are included in disaster assistance and risk management as well. So I think what Paddy was saying about the longer term engagement is really important. So we're going to, she's on video. We've got a address from her. So if we can play that now, please. Thank you.
Hello. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to everyone in the room in Geneva today, as well as to everyone who's logging in remotely from your various locations. My name is Daniella Villacres, and I work at USAID's Bureau for Humanitarian Assistance, where I lead a team focused on engaging diaspora communities and other innovative civic actors in humanitarian response and disaster relief. Although regrettably I'm not able to be with you in person today, it is my sincere pleasure to have the opportunity to share a few words with you as we kick off what I'm sure will be an exciting 2 days of fruitful conversation and discussion. I joined USAID 3 years ago with the goal of building up a program and a team around diaspora humanitarianism. As a first order of business, when I started this position, I reached out to the Danish Refugee Council's Diaspora Emergency Action and Coordination Team, DEMAC. I was well aware of DEMAC's work as it had firmly established itself as a leader in the space of diaspora humanitarianism. I knew their expertise and their partnership would be invaluable to USAID and its mission. And indeed, their work has raised the bar. In the past 2 years that USAID has funded DEMAC, DEMAC has been at the forefront of diaspora engagement for humanitarian action. In particular, DEMAC has focused on strengthening coordination between diaspora humanitarians and more traditional institutional humanitarian actors. To this end, DEMAC has significantly enriched knowledge and learning in this space, not only through convening of stakeholders like we have here today, but also through the team's participation in countless events and roundtables. In addition, DEMAC has also undertaken and disseminated groundbreaking research. DEMAC published much-needed best practices on diaspora humanitarianism, filling significant knowledge gaps in how to operationalize this kind of work. For example, it conducted 3 original case studies and then extrapolated those best practices and applied them to several real-time crises as they were unfolding. From a donor's perspective, our partnership with DEMAC has been fundamental to advancing our commitment to diaspora humanitarianism. USAID recognizes the importance of working with diaspora communities throughout the response cycle. As the saying goes, diaspora are often first responders, active during the crisis, and they remain long after other traditional humanitarian actors have left. Thus, diaspora are key to bridging the humanitarian development nexus, diaspora are key to advancing the localization agenda, In short, diaspora are key stakeholders for USAID to deliver more efficient and more impactful humanitarian aid. As a testament to our commitment to working on diaspora engagement, USAID's Bureau for Humanitarian Assistance is actively growing a team with this focus. In the past 3 years, we have funded a range of activities through our partners, and moreover, we have designed and launched 2 pilots, the Diaspora Partnership Accelerator and the Switchboard. These pilot projects engage diaspora groups directly in order to leverage their unique voices and contributions. The work in these pilots has included diaspora innovation for disaster risk management and strengthening networks of diaspora humanitarians across generations and geographies. At BHA, we are also in the process of developing our team's strategy and vision plan, which puts diaspora's role for humanitarian action front and center. At its core, the team's vision celebrates and amplifies diaspora's powerful civic voices. In our team strategy, we have 3 objectives. The first is to elevate the profile of diaspora humanitarianism. The second is to expand partnerships and programs. And the third is to identify openings and opportunities to effectively engage with diaspora. Again, I would like to welcome everyone to this event, and I extend a big thank you to everyone for their continued commitment and passion towards this topic. I wish everyone a lively and fruitful conversation, and without further delay, I will now turn it over to DEMAC. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. And it's great that institutional donors are also giving this attention, because I think, as Paddy was saying earlier, the visibility of diaspora actors is also really important, because they can help to do more, and perhaps even more effectively if they're included in some of the coordination mechanism and others. So what we wanted to do next is really have a conversation, and I think these issues came up, right, around trust, transparency, and local ties. So we're going to talk about this and how this happens in this ecosystem of humanitarian aid. And for that, I would like to welcome our panelists. So Cinzia, please come and join us. Lars, is there? Yeah, Lars, please. Nick, Van Praag, and Paddy, please come and join us, and let's have a conversation. Thank you. So I'm going to just tell you a little bit more about our panelists before we start. So Cinzia is the CEO and founder of Healing Venezuela. And she's a biologist with masters in public policies. She had a career in environmentalism, working for NGOs and international oil companies. In her last post, she was head of health, safety, and environment for FTSE 100 companies. Cinzia has been involved in non-profit organizations in the UK and Venezuela, and founded Healing Venezuela in 2016. Welcome. Paddy, you already know, so I won't go through again in extension. Nick, welcome. So Nick Van Praag is the founder of Ground Truth Solution. And that was since 2012 he created this. And it was really to the goal of bringing perspective of people into the humanitarian crisis in decision making, because we see that a lot of the time they are being left out. So he oversaw the development of the organization and the methodology to do that, and how to measure, right, that is happening. So Nick's current focus is really on extending the organization's range of activities, include adaptation of climate change and global health. and of course a rich career in the humanitarian sector in different UN organizations and others. So you bring in many years of experience. So we're really looking forward to listening to you about the experiences now on accountability. Lars, welcome. So Lars Peter Nissen, he's the director of ACAPS and also hosts the Humanitarian and conversations, and had some really great conversations with different actors within the system. And he works since 1980s, so you trumped me because I said I'm in the sector for 25 years. He has worked with NGOs and the UN within the Red Cross. He's lived and worked in extended period in different countries affected by crises, Afghanistan to Zimbabwe. And for the last 12 years, he has been the director of ACAPS. And in his spare time, he's doing the Humanitarian. So we are really keen to hear the global perspective from you, as you've been in the system for a long time. But let me start off by putting some questions, because we really would like to hear a bit more. Cinzia, tell us about your experience in working in humanitarian situations around the health interventions. What are some of the operational coordination challenges that you face in your work? And then how do you build trust? Because trust is at the center, and I think, Paddy, you put it on the nail. So just share a little bit. I think there's a mic there.
Yes, it works. So the case of Venezuela is quite unique in the sense that despite the crisis that is going on in the country, the government denies it, okay? So the government absolutely had, at the beginning of the crisis in 2014, it was extremely difficult to support Venezuela, and we had to do it, from the back door, a very low profile, sending medical supplies in small shipment to avoid, attention from the government. Little by little, though, when, as I said, we started from getting into the hospitals through the back door, and but when the government officials that were appointed to the hospitals, so the director of hospitals in Venezuela are all political appointees, okay? When they started to see that we didn't have any political agenda, that we didn't have any further intention but to help Venezuelans, we actually became not only trusted partners, but favorite partners. And one of the reasons why we are, at the moment, working very well with hospitals, and now, at the beginning, we had to get in touch with hospitals. Now, hospitals get in touch with us. It's because we are there, and we're there to stay. The crisis in Venezuela became very evident. There was a flurry of international aid getting to the country, but actually now it's fading away. The international aid architecture is not very interested in Venezuela anymore, and so they are leaving, but we are staying, and that's one of the reasons why I think we're building a trust that we build. Now, say that, I wouldn't be surprised if tomorrow, something happens and we need to step back. So we always say that we dance a tango with the government, so one step further and two step back. But that tango, that dynamic so far has worked, and our job has really been, luckily, has been uncompromised. I mean, not jeopardized by the political agenda.
Great, thank you. Thank you. So that building trust through building trust, right? I like this tango, right? I think many of us have to tango and find ways of building those bridges. Paddy, so what Cinzia is saying, does that resonate? Is there something that you already have experienced in the work you do?
Absolutely. I think that, well, first of all, building trust has to be earned, in any kind of setting or relationship, even between a baby and its mother. And I think that in good times, in a good political environment, probably things work out easier. But when things have been tense, particularly with the diaspora, if you've had, a lot of times For instance, in many settings, diaspora can be viewed as the opposition. And I think that's kind of important to point out, because I think then when we engage, we're much more clear on the suspicions that are there. And I think part of the building trust is laying down the suspicions and really unpacking them. And I think this tango dance is really a part of it. Can I trust you? Are you here for the long term? Are you looking for more information? Who's funding you? Why are they financing you? Are you here for this particular humanitarian need, or is there a long-term agenda that has more political consequences? So I think that, and also because diaspora always look for an opportunity to do advocacy as well. So at the same time, for diaspora, it's important that as you engage, you are also trying to have a bit of a systems change. So when you engage in a space where it's a public health related issue, the idea would also be that if there have been difficulties, or there've been, the way the health system is sort of managed, and the diaspora has been trying to engage for a very long time, when there's crisis in that public health system, it is an opportunity for you to engage. So I really think that also from the part of the diaspora, you play it smart, because you are there indeed for the long term. But then I also think that at the same time, it's the trust from the other way around. Can they trust the diaspora to be there for a long term? And I think that sometimes local organizations, governments, and those that are, homeland-based organizations, as one would call them, is that they've also seen that diaspora have been able to physically detach from the homeland. So is your attachment part of just to your community because this is happening, a crisis in your specific community, or are you really interested in national development? So I think those different cards have to be laid down before that trust is sort of built up and established.
Great, thank you, thank you. And that brings me to the question of, okay, so you're trying to build the trust, but there is this suspicion, there's there's all these other things that you have to really navigate, right? And then there's the other side, the international actors as well. So you talked about the government and the local actors, but there's that system, humanitarian system. So, how do you build trust with the humanitarian actors who are there as well? And you said to me, Cinzia, that they come and they go, but there is that tension, right? So how do you build trust with them? Because that's important as well.
Well, basically, you don't. You don't for a very simple reason. They snub you, they ignore you, don't reply the emails, don't answer the phone, and they even, fail to attend meetings. So we have tried very hard to work. I mean, just to give you a few examples of why I say you don't build trust. We work back to back in 3 hospitals. I have 3 examples. One was a water treatment plant. We have installed 3 water treatment plants. And before we installed the water treatment plant, a large, very large NGO cleaned and repaired the big tank, right? Well, a year later, we have now to repair the big tank that they failed to repair properly. So that's one example. The other example, also with water treatment plants, we were working, basically next door to a large NGO that we try really hard to engage with them, apart from personal admiration that I had for them. And we say, look, we're all interested in improving the quality of the water in hospitals, which is quite critical. Can we talk about which are your plans? Never managed to talk to them. So we installed our plant, and then they came and refurbished the room. So, not doing a proper job. And the last thing that really, this was really absolutely blew my mind. We are engaged we have a program to prevent teenage pregnancy, which is rampant in Venezuela. It's a big crisis. And we are working with an NGO on the ground that receives funds from a super large NGO. The super large NGO allegedly pay for the doctors, and we pay for the T-coils, okay? Have we been able to talk to this large NGO to say, how are we going to do this? I mean, when are your what doctors do you need? One nurse, how many nurses? Okay. No, so we ended up paying, the whole program. Okay, we will do ourselves. So basically, we have really been, I'm very disappointed at the way these international NGOs work. The money stays there, it doesn't trickle down to diasporas. And so we basically have given up. So we really we do our job, and if one day they decide to pay attention to us, I once asked, but why? Why you don't want to work with us? Why don't you fund us? And they say, oh, because you're all politicized. And I say, well, that's very simplistic and actually quite lazy. Because if you look at the 600 diaspora organizations from Venezuela, you would see that out of 600, probably 3 are very politicized. The rest of us are doing our job, even if we're working with our political opponents, is something that this is not something that has anything to do with the humanitarian spectrum if you work with serious organizations. So we basically just kind of, we really don't care very much anymore.
Paddy, would you like to add something to that and your perspective?
From my perspective, I think it's about tactfulness, and I think the diaspora, and maybe I'll take an example of engagement of African diaspora for support of third country nationals in Ukraine. And there was about tactics. And that means that you gather with you a group of diaspora that understand the mechanisms and can also criticize international organizations and other actors. So a bit differently from how governments would engage with international organizations because they're sort of wanting to be on the receiving end of financing. Diaspora, as she has mentioned, will still do it. Whether you receive the financing or not, you're driven by the need. So if you are driven then by the need, whether there is that kind of financing or you have to gather around and do some crowd pulling, you will go ahead with the task. So in a way, I feel that diaspora is not really afraid to question international organizations. So we walk in with a lot of questions, but also we're walking in to say, this action is needed and is needed now. And our engagement, for instance, with international organization, you walk in by saying, so we do understand you have